You were told the universe began with a bang, a single explosive moment that birthed space, time, matter, and everything you've ever known. But what if that's not just incomplete? What if it's fundamentally wrong? What if the Big Bang never happened the way we think it did, and the real story is so much stranger, so much more terrifying, that we've been hiding from it behind comfortable lies? Picture this. You're standing at the edge of existence itself, peering into a void so complete that calling it nothing is still giving it too much credit. This isn't the darkness between stars. That's practically crowded with possibility compared to what we're talking about. This is the absence that came before absence, the non-time that preceded time, the unspace that somehow gave birth to space. And here's the thing that should make your skin crawl. You might be looking at your true origin. Every atom in your body, every thought in your mind, every breath you take, they all supposedly emerged from this impossible nothing. But nothing doesn't explode. Nothing doesn't expand. Nothing doesn't create. So what really happened in that first moment? What kind of cosmic sorcery transforms absolute zero into infinite everything? You were taught that time began 13.8 billion years ago, that space started expanding from a point smaller than the period at the end of this sentence. But ask yourself this: if time began then, what does before even mean? If space started expanding then, what was it expanding into? These aren't just academic questions. They're cracks in the foundation of everything you think you know about reality. The scientists who discovered the cosmic microwave background radiation thought they'd found the echo of creation itself, the afterglow of that primordial explosion still reverberating through space. They won Nobel Prizes for it. They built their careers on it. But what if they were only hearing the echo of an echo, the shadow of something far more profound and unsettling? Here's what keeps the smartest minds in cosmology awake at night. The Big Bang Theory explains almost everything about our universe except for the one thing that matters most: why there's something instead of nothing. It's like having a perfect map of every road in the world, but no explanation for why the ground exists in the first place. Think about your own existence for a moment. Right now, as you process these words, billions of neurons are firing in precise patterns, creating the illusion of consciousness, of a continuous self moving through time. But every particle in your brain, every quantum interaction that generates your thoughts, traces back to that alleged moment of creation. If that story is wrong, then what are you? What is the nature of the consciousness experiencing this very confusion? The deeper we dig into the origins of space-time, the more we discover that our most fundamental assumptions might be backwards. What if time didn't begin? What if it's eternal, cyclical, a dimension we're traveling through like a river, unable to see the source or the destination? What if space isn't expanding into emptiness, but condensing out of something unimaginably vast and complex? The ancient philosophers had a term for this: ex nihilo nihil fit. Nothing comes from nothing. They understood intuitively what our modern physics is slowly rediscovering. True nothingness cannot generate anything because nothingness has no properties, no potential, no capacity for change. Yet here we are, in a universe filled with galaxies, stars, planets, and the impossible complexity of conscious beings trying to understand their own existence. What if the Big Bang wasn't the beginning, but the middle of something far grander? What if our entire observable universe, with its 100 billion galaxies, is just a brief fluctuation in a reality so vast that our concepts of time and space are like trying to describe an ocean with words for drops of water? Consider this disturbing possibility. What if consciousness itself, Your very ability to contemplate these questions exists outside the normal flow of time. What if the awareness reading these words right now is somehow connected to that primordial moment before space and time began? What if you're not just studying the origins of the universe? What if you're remembering them? The mathematics that describe our universe break down at the moment of the Big Bang. They produce infinities, impossibilities, equations that curl back on themselves like a snake eating its own tail. It's as if reality itself is trying to hide something from us, throwing up mathematical barriers whenever we get too close to the truth about our origins. But perhaps the most unsettling question of all is this: if time itself had a beginning, then what is the nature of the entity or process that could exist before time to create time? What kind of intelligence or force operates outside the very dimensions that define existence as we know it? And why did it choose to create a universe capable of producing beings who would eventually ask these very questions? You might wonder if these are just abstract philosophical puzzles, intellectual games with no real impact on your daily life. But they're not. The answer to the question of what came before space and time determines the nature of causality itself, the meaning of existence, and whether the consciousness you experience as you is a temporary arrangement of matter or something far more fundamental and eternal. Here's the truth that scientists whisper in the corridors of universities but rarely admit in public. We don't know what we're talking about when we discuss the origin of the universe. We have theories, elegant mathematics, convincing narratives, but at the deepest level, we're still children telling ghost stories around a campfire, trying to make sense of shadows we can barely see. The story you're about to hear isn't just about cosmology or physics. It's about the possibility that everything you think you know about the nature of reality is a comforting fiction, and that the truth about our origins is so strange, so far beyond human comprehension, that encountering it might fundamentally change what it means to be conscious in this universe. So here's the question that will haunt every word of what follows. If there was something before the Big Bang, before space and time themselves, what was it? And more importantly, what if it's still there, waiting in the darkness before existence, watching us discover the truth about where we really came from? The universe as we know it is expanding. Right now, as you read these words, space itself is stretching, carrying galaxies away from each other at speeds that would make light itself seem sluggish. This isn't just movement through space. This is space creating more of itself, reality literally growing larger with each passing moment. But here's where the comfortable scientific narrative begins to crack. If space is expanding, what exactly is it expanding into? Picture the cosmos as a vast ocean, not of water, but of space-time itself. A four-dimensional fabric where every point contains the potential for matter, energy, and the delicate dance of physical laws. 13.8 billion years ago, according to our best theories, this ocean was compressed into a region smaller than a proton, containing all the mass and energy that would eventually become every star, every planet, every living thing that has ever existed. The temperature was infinite. The density was infinite. The curvature of space-time was so extreme that our mathematics simply give up and declare the situation impossible. This is what cosmologists call the initial singularity, a point where the normal rules of physics break down so completely that they might as well be describing magic. But here's the thing about singularities. They're not really places or times. They're mathematical artifacts, red flags that tell us we're asking the wrong questions or using the wrong tools. When our equations produce infinity, they're essentially throwing up their hands and saying, something important is happening here, but we don't have the language to describe it. The story we tell ourselves goes like this. From this impossible beginning, the universe underwent a period of cosmic inflation, expanding faster than the speed of light, which is perfectly legal, since it's space itself that's expanding, not matter moving through space. In less than a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second, the universe grew from subatomic to astronomical in size. The very fabric of reality stretched like a balloon being inflated by a cosmic breath. But imagine trying to explain this to someone who has never seen a balloon, never experienced expansion, never conceived of space as something that could grow. How do you describe the stretching of nothingness? How do you explain that the gaps between things can themselves become bigger, creating more gaps? It's like trying to describe color to someone who has never seen light, or music to someone who has never heard sound. The young cosmos, in those first moments after inflation, was a seething cauldron of pure energy. There were no atoms yet, no protons or neutrons, just a soup of fundamental particles and forces so hot and dense that matter as we know it couldn't exist. It was a universe of pure potential, where the distinction between matter and energy was meaningless, where particles popped in and out of existence like thoughts in a fevered dream. As this primordial fire cooled, and we're talking about cooling from temperatures that would make the core of the sun seem like a winter morning, the first atomic nuclei began to form. Protons and neutrons, those building blocks of matter, found each other in the chaos and held on. But even then, the universe was still too hot for electrons to settle into stable orbits. The cosmos was opaque, a fog of charged particles that scattered light in every direction. This is where the cosmic microwave background radiation comes from, that faint glow that fills the entire universe, the afterglow of the moment when the universe finally cooled enough for atoms to form and light to travel freely through space. It's the oldest light we can see, the baby picture of the universe taken when it was only 380,000 years old. When radio telescopes detect this radiation, they're literally listening to the echo of creation itself. But here's where the story starts to feel like a fairy tale told by very smart people who may be missing the point entirely. The cosmic microwave background is remarkably uniform, with tiny fluctuations that would later grow into the large-scale structure of the universe, the cosmic web of galaxies and dark matter that we see today. It's almost too perfect, too precisely calibrated to produce a universe capable of supporting complexity, structure, and ultimately, consciousness. This is what physicists call the fine-tuning problem. The fundamental constants of nature, the strength of gravity, the mass of the electron, the speed of light, are balanced with such precision that even tiny changes would result in a universe where stars couldn't form, atoms couldn't bond, or life could never emerge. It's as if someone carefully adjusted the cosmic thermostat to create the only possible universe where beings like us could exist, to ask questions about our own existence. The more we study the early universe, the more we realize that calling it the beginning might be profoundly misleading. Time itself, as we experience it, is tied to the expansion of space. But what if time, like space, is just one dimension of a larger reality? What if the Big Bang wasn't the start of time, but the moment when a timeless realm intersected with temporal existence? Consider the mathematics of general relativity, Einstein's description of gravity as the curvature of space-time. The equations work beautifully to describe the universe as we observe it, but they contain a troubling assumption. They assume that space-time is continuous, that you can zoom in infinitely on any point and still find meaningful structure. But what if that's wrong? What if space and time are quantized, made up of discrete units smaller than anything we can currently measure? This is where quantum mechanics enters the picture. with its own set of paradoxes and impossibilities. The ET2C, quantum level. Particles don't have definite positions or velocities until they're observed. They exist in superpositions of all possible states simultaneously. The act of measurement doesn't just reveal reality, it appears to create it. Virtual particles pop in and out of existence, borrowing energy from the vacuum and paying it back. Before the universe's accounting system notices, the vacuum itself, that supposedly empty space between particles, turns out to be a roiling sea of quantum activity. Particle pairs appear and annihilate, fields fluctuate wildly at the smallest scales, and the very concepts of something and nothing become meaningless. This quantum foam might be the closest thing we have to a description of what reality looks like at the most fundamental level. But if the vacuum is not empty, if even nothing is something, then what does it mean to say the universe came from nothing? What if the Big Bang wasn't the creation of space and time, but the moment when a pre-existing quantum reality suddenly became classical, when the superposition of all possible universes collapsed into the one we observe? The cosmic inflation that supposedly occurred in the first fraction of a second after the Big Bang raises its own disturbing questions. What caused inflation to begin? What caused it to end? And most troubling of all, if inflation can happen once, creating our universe, what prevents it from happening again and again, creating an infinite number of universes with different physical laws, different histories, different versions of reality? This is the multiverse hypothesis, the idea that our universe is just one bubble in an infinite foam of cosmic realities. Some of these universes might be similar to ours, with only minor differences in history or physical constants. Others might be so alien that the very concepts of matter, energy, and time have no meaning. In this picture, the fine-tuning of our universe isn't mysterious at all. It's inevitable that some universes would be capable of supporting observers, and we necessarily find ourselves in one of them. But the multiverse raises a question that should make your blood run cold. If there are infinite universes with infinite possibilities, then every possible version of your life is being lived out somewhere. There are universes where you made different choices, where history unfolded differently, where the very atoms in your body never came together to form the pattern that thinks it's you. Which one is real? Which one is the original? How would you ever know? The stage is set then, not for a simple story of cosmic evolution, but for a mystery that challenges the very foundation of rational thought. We have a universe that seems fine-tuned for our existence, arising from initial conditions so precise that they appear miraculous. We have quantum mechanics suggesting that reality is fundamentally probabilistic, that the act of observation creates the world we observe. We have general relativity pointing to a beginning that might not be a beginning at all, but a transition from one kind of existence to another. And underneath it all, we have the nagging suspicion that we're asking the wrong questions entirely. What if the universe didn't begin with the Big Bang? What if space and time are not fundamental features of reality, but emergent properties of something deeper and more mysterious? What if the question, what came before the Big Bang, is like asking, what's north of the North Pole? Grammatically correct, but meaningless within the framework of our current understanding. The cosmic story we tell ourselves is magnificent in its scope and elegance, but it's also deeply unsatisfying. It explains how the universe evolved from a hot, dense state to the complex cosmos we see today, but it doesn't explain why there was a hot, dense state in the first place, or why there is anything at all rather than nothing. It's a story that begins in the middle, with the most important chapter missing. What if that missing chapter isn't just unknown? What if it's unknowable? What if the origin of space and time lies forever beyond the reach of human comprehension, not because of technical limitations, but because the very concepts we use to think about existence break down when applied to the question of existence itself. The moment you try to peer behind the curtain of the Big Bang, you encounter something that should terrify any rational mind: the complete breakdown of causality itself. Every law of physics we've discovered, every principle that governs the behavior of matter and energy, every mathematical relationship that describes reality, they all assume the existence of space and time. But what happens when you try to use these tools to explain the origin of space and time themselves? It's like trying to use a ruler to measure the concept of measurement, or using language to explain why language exists. This is where we discover that our universe might be built on a foundation of pure paradox. The second law of thermodynamics tells us that entropy always increases, that order inevitably gives way to disorder, that energy spreads out and becomes unavailable, that the universe is running down like a cosmic clock winding toward its final tick. But if entropy always increases, then the early universe must have been in a state of incredibly low entropy, almost impossibly ordered and organized. How did that initial order arise from the chaos that supposedly preceded it? Imagine trying to explain to a fish what it means to be wet. The fish has never experienced anything but water, so wetness is not a property it can perceive. It's simply the medium through which all of its experiences occur. We might be in a similar situation with space and time. These aren't just the stage on which the cosmic drama unfolds. They might be so fundamental to our existence that we can't step outside them to see what they really are or what might have existed before them. The mathematics of general relativity paint a picture of space-time as a dynamic, flexible fabric that can be stretched, curved, and even torn under extreme conditions. Near black holes, this fabric becomes so warped that time slows to a crawl, and space itself becomes twisted into impossible geometries. The event horizon of a black hole isn't just a boundary in space, it's a boundary in causality itself, a point beyond which causes and effects become disconnected from our observable reality. But black holes might be more than just exotic objects scattered throughout the universe. They might be windows into the nature of reality itself. When matter falls into a black hole, it doesn't just disappear. According to quantum mechanics, the information describing that matter must be preserved somehow. This leads to the black hole information paradox, a contradiction between general relativity and quantum mechanics that has puzzled physicists for decades. Here's where it gets disturbing. Some theories suggest that when you fall into a black hole, you don't experience being destroyed. Instead, from your perspective, you pass through the event horizon and see the interior of the black hole. But, from the outside perspective, you're frozen at the event horizon forever. Your information encoded on the black hole's surface. Both perspectives are equally valid, which means reality itself might be observer-dependent at the most fundamental level. What if the Big Bang was simply our universe emerging from the interior of a black hole in a higher dimensional space? What if every black hole in our universe gives birth to new universes, and our entire cosmos is just the interior of a black hole in someone else's reality? This isn't science fiction. It's a serious theoretical possibility that could explain why our universe appears fine-tuned for our existence. The quantum foam that underlies all of reality presents its own set of impossible contradictions. See, the Planck scale, distances so small that they make atomic nuclei look like galaxies, space and time themselves become quantized, flickering in and out of existence like a cosmic strobe light. Virtual particles appear and disappear, borrowing energy from the vacuum and paying it back before the universe's bookkeeping system can catch the violation. But what if some of these quantum fluctuations don't pay back their energy debt? What If our entire universe is simply the result of a quantum fluctuation that got out of hand, this is the quantum fluctuation hypothesis, the idea that our universe spontaneously emerged from quantum foam through a random fluctuation in the vacuum. It sounds absurd, but quantum mechanics tells us that anything that's not explicitly forbidden will eventually happen, given enough time. If the vacuum state is not the absolute ground state of reality, then fluctuations to higher energy states are not just possible, they're inevitable. But this raises a question that should keep you awake. At night, if our universe arose from a random quantum fluctuation, what prevents it from randomly fluctuating back to nothing? What if the stability of atoms, the consistency of physical laws, the very existence of matter and energy are all temporary states in a quantum system that could collapse back to vacuum at any moment? The anthropic principle attempts to address some of these unsettling questions by pointing out that we necessarily find ourselves in a universe capable of supporting observers. If the fundamental constants were different, we wouldn't be here to notice. But this explanation feels like a cosmic shell game. It explains why we observe a life-friendly universe by assuming that all possible universes exist somewhere, and we happen to be in one of the rare ones that can support consciousness. Yet the multiverse hypothesis, while elegant, comes with its own terrifying implications. If every possible universe exists, then there are versions of reality where the Holocaust never happened, but also versions where it was far worse. There are universes where you never existed, and universes where you're the only conscious being in existence. There are realities where the laws of physics are so different that suffering and joy, life and death, meaning and meaninglessness are concepts that have no application. In some versions of multiverse theory, called eternal inflation, our universe is just one bubble in an infinite foam of cosmic realities, each with its own Big Bang, its own evolution, its own ultimate fate. The space between these universe bubbles is still inflating, creating new bubbles constantly, so that the multiverse as a whole is not just infinite in space, but growing infinitely larger with each passing moment. But here's what should terrify you about eternal inflation. If it's true, then everything that can happen will happen, infinitely many times. There are infinite versions of you reading these words right now, with tiny variations in their experiences. There are versions where you stopped reading one word earlier, versions where you never started reading at all, versions where the words on the page are completely different because the history of language evolved differently in those realities. This leads to the measure problem in cosmology. If there are infinitely many observers in infinitely many universes, how do you calculate the probability of any particular observation? How do you make sense of being a conscious observer in an infinite ensemble of conscious observers? The mathematics of infinity break down when you try to assign probabilities to infinite sets, leaving us with paradoxes that might be fundamentally unsolvable. The concept of dark matter adds another layer to this cosmic mystery. 85% of all matter in the universe is apparently made of something that doesn't interact with light, doesn't absorb or emit electromagnetic radiation, and is invisible to all of our direct detection methods. We know it's there only because of its gravitational effects on visible matter. Galaxies spin too fast, galaxy clusters hold together too strongly, and the cosmic microwave background shows patterns that require far more matter than we can see. But what if dark matter isn't just invisible? What if it exists in a different kind of space altogether? What if there are dimensions of reality that we can't perceive directly, folded up so small or stretched so thin that we only notice their effects through gravity, which might be the only force that can reach across dimensional boundaries? String theory attempts to address these questions by proposing that all fundamental particles are not point-like objects, but tiny, vibrating strings existing in a space with more than the 4 dimensions we experience. The different vibrational modes of these strings correspond to different particles: electrons, quarks, photons, and all the rest. But string theory requires the existence of extra dimensions, possibly as many as 11, most of which must be curled up so small that we can't detect them directly. What if consciousness itself involves interactions with these extra dimensions? What if the strange properties of quantum mechanics, superposition, entanglement, the measurement problem, arise because consciousness can access aspects of reality that are hidden from our normal three-dimensional perception? This isn't mysticism. It's a serious theoretical possibility that emerges from our best current understanding of fundamental physics. The arrow of time presents its own set of paradoxes. Why does time seem to flow in only one direction, from past to future, when most of the laws of physics are time-symmetric? Why do we remember the past, but not the future? Why does entropy increase rather than decrease? The second law of thermodynamics provides a partial answer, but it only pushes the mystery back a step. Why was the early universe in such a low entropy state that entropy could increase in the first place? Some theories suggest that time might not be fundamental at all, but an emergent property of more basic quantum processes. In this view, what we experience as the passage of time is actually the increase in entanglement between quantum systems. The past is the realm of disentangled, separable quantum states, while the future is the realm of increasingly entangled, correlated states. The present moment is the boundary between these regimes, the ever-shifting edge where quantum information becomes classical reality. But if time is emergent rather than fundamental, then the question of what came before the Big Bang becomes even more meaningless than asking what's north of the North Pole. There was no before, because before and after are concepts that only make sense within the context of emergent time. The Big Bang wasn't an event that happened at a particular time. It was the beginning of time itself, the moment when the quantum processes that give rise to temporal experience first began. This leads us to consider the possibility that consciousness itself might be non-temporal, that the awareness experiencing this moment might exist outside the normal flow of time. If consciousness is not produced by the brain, but rather received or focused by it, like a radio tuning into a broadcast, then the death of the brain might not mean the end of consciousness, but simply the end of its localization in space-time. The Haros simulation hypothesis offers another perspective on these questions that should make you question the nature of your own existence. If conscious beings can create detailed simulations of reality, and if consciousness can exist within those simulations, then there are likely far more simulated conscious beings than natural ones. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to be a simulation than a biological entity in a base reality. But the simulation hypothesis raises questions that cut to the core of what it means to exist. If you're a simulation, are your experiences less real than those of a biological being? If a simulated consciousness can suffer, love, create, and contemplate its own existence, what meaningful difference is there between simulated and natural consciousness? And if the beings running the simulation are themselves simulations in an even more fundamental reality, how many layers of simulation might there be? The concept of Boltzmann brains takes this existential crisis to its logical extreme. In a universe dominated by thermal equilibrium, random fluctuations will occasionally produce organized structures, including brains with false memories of having lived entire lives. If the universe continues expanding and cooling for trillions of years, these spontaneous brains will eventually outnumber all the brains that evolved through natural processes. This means that if you're a rational observer trying to figure out the nature of reality, you should consider the possibility that you're a Boltzmann brain, a random fluctuation in quantum foam that popped into existence just moments ago with all your memories intact. Your entire sense of having a past, of living in a universe with a long history, could be nothing more than the accidental pattern of neural activity in a brain that spontaneously assembled itself from vacuum fluctuations. The heat death of the universe presents its own form of existential terror. Current models suggest that the universe will continue expanding and cooling until all the stars burn out, all the black holes evaporate through Hawking radiation, and all that remains is a thin soup of elementary particles growing ever more dilute as space continues to stretch. This is maximum entropy, a state where no further work can be extracted from the system, where information becomes meaningless, where the very concept of change loses its meaning. But even heat death might not be the end. Some theories suggest that quantum tunneling events, occurring over timescales so vast that they make the current age of the universe seem like an instant, could eventually cause the vacuum itself to decay to an even lower energy state. This vacuum decay would propagate outward at the speed of light, annihilating everything in its path and potentially rewriting the laws of physics themselves. Yet other theories propose that the universe might be cyclical, that the Big Bang was not the beginning, but simply the most recent in an infinite series of expansions and contractions. In this model, the universe expands until dark energy tears it apart, but then somehow contracts again, crushing all matter and energy back into a singularity that explodes outward in a new Big Bang. Each cycle might have different physical laws, different fundamental constants, different possibilities for structure and consciousness. What if we're not living in the first iteration of this cosmic cycle, but in the trillionth repetition of a pattern that has been playing out since when? If the universe is cyclical, then the question of ultimate origins becomes even more mysterious. What set the first cycle in motion? What maintains the pattern across infinite repetitions? What determines the variations between cycles? The concept of quantum gravity attempts to unify general relativity with quantum mechanics, but it leads to conclusions that challenge our most basic assumptions about the nature of space and time. At the Planck scale, the uncertainty principle suggests that space-time itself must be subject to quantum fluctuations so violent that the very notion of a smooth, continuous fabric of reality breaks down completely. In loop quantum gravity, space is not continuous, but made up of discrete units, atoms of space, if you will, connected by quantum relationships. Time is not a smooth flow, but a series of discrete moments, like frames in a cosmic movie. The Big Bang, in this picture, is not a singularity, but a quantum bounce, the moment when a previous universe that had contracted to the Planck scale rebounded outward in a new expansion. But if space and time are quantized, what does that mean? For consciousness? Is awareness itself quantized, made up of discrete moments of experience connected by quantum relationships? Are thoughts and perceptions made up of fundamental units of consciousness, combined and recombined in patterns that create the illusion of continuous experience? The measurement problem in quantum mechanics suggests that consciousness might play a fundamental role in the structure of reality itself. According to the Copenhagen interpretation, quantum systems exist in superpositions of all possible states until they're observed, at which point the wave function collapses and a definite outcome is observed. But what constitutes an observation? When does the quantum realm become classical? Why does consciousness seem to have this privileged role in determining the structure of reality? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness doesn't collapse the wave function. Instead, the wave function never collapses, and consciousness splits along with the quantum system into multiple parallel realities. In this many worlds interpretation, every quantum measurement creates new branches of reality, each containing a version of you that observed a different outcome. If the many worlds interpretation is correct, then there are versions of you reading these words in universes where quantum mechanics works differently, where the fundamental constants have different values, where history unfolded along different paths. There are versions where you never developed consciousness at all, and versions where your consciousness is radically different from what you experience now. The question of whether mathematics is discovered or invented becomes crucial when we consider the nature of physical laws themselves. If mathematical relationships are simply human constructs, then the apparent mathematical nature of physical laws might be a reflection of the structure of human cognition rather than the structure of reality. But if mathematics exists independently of human minds, then the question becomes, what is the relationship between mathematical truth and physical reality? Platonic realism suggests that mathematical objects exist in a timeless realm of perfect forms, and that physical reality is simply a shadow or reflection of this mathematical reality. In this view, the laws of physics are not descriptions of how matter and energy behave. They are the mathematical structures that define the very existence of matter and energy. The universe doesn't obey mathematical laws. The universe is a mathematical structure. But if the universe is fundamentally mathematical, what does that make consciousness? Is awareness itself a mathematical relationship? Is the experience of reading these words nothing more than information processing in a cosmic computer? Or is consciousness something that exists outside the mathematical description of reality? Something that can observe and experience mathematical structures, but is not itself reducible to mathematics? The anthropic principle and the fine-tuning of fundamental constants suggest that our universe is balanced on a knife's edge between chaos and complexity. If gravity were slightly stronger, stars would burn out too quickly for life to evolve. If the weak nuclear force were slightly different, supernovas wouldn't produce the heavy elements necessary for planets and biology. If the cosmological constant were much larger, the universe would have expanded too quickly for galaxies to form. This fine-tuning could be evidence for intelligent design, but it could also be evidence for the multiverse, if all possible values of the fundamental constants are realized somewhere, then we necessarily find ourselves in a universe where they happen to have values compatible with our existence. But both explanations require something existing outside our universe, either a designer or a mechanism for generating multiple universes with different properties. The horizon problem in cosmology reveals another layer of mystery: the cosmic. Microwave background radiation is remarkably uniform across the entire sky, with temperature variations of only a few parts in a million. But regions of the sky that are separated by more than a few degrees have been out of causal contact since the Big Bang. Light from one region couldn't have reached the other region in the time available. How did these causally disconnected regions come to have almost exactly the same temperature? Cosmic inflation provides a solution. If the universe underwent a period of exponential expansion in its first moments, then regions that are now causally disconnected were once close enough to exchange information and reach thermal equilibrium. But inflation itself requires fine-tuning. The energy density driving inflation must have been almost exactly constant, and the transition from inflation to normal expansion must have occurred at just the right moment. What if inflation is still occurring in most of the universe, and our observable region is just a small bubble where inflation happened to end? This eternal inflation scenario suggests that the Big Bang wasn't a unique event, but one of infinitely many transitions from inflationary expansion to normal expansion, each creating a pocket universe with its own properties and physical laws. But eternal inflation leads to paradoxes of its own. If inflation has been going on forever, then every possible configuration of matter and energy has been realized infinitely many times. There are infinite copies of you reading these words, infinite. Copies with slight variations, infinite copies in universes with different histories. The concept of uniqueness becomes meaningless in an infinitely inflating multiverse. The dark energy that drives the current acceleration of cosmic expansion might be the key to understanding the nature of space itself. Dark energy behaves like a cosmological constant, a property of space that causes empty space to have a tendency to expand. But quantum field theory predicts that vacuum energy should be enormous, while observations suggest that dark energy is incredibly small. This is the cosmological constant problem, one of the most severe fine-tuning problems in all of physics. What if dark energy is not constant, but dynamic, changing over time in response to the evolution of the universe? What if the apparent fine-tuning of the cosmological constant is not a coincidence, but a requirement for the existence of observers? In some models, universes with different values of the cosmological constant undergo different evolutionary paths, and only those with values similar to what we observe can develop the complexity necessary for consciousness. The concept of emergence suggests that consciousness, like time itself, might arise from simpler underlying processes without being reducible to those processes. Just as wetness emerges from the interactions of water molecules without being present in any individual molecule, consciousness might emerge from neural activity without being locatable in any particular neuron or brain region. But emergence is a mysterious process that we don't fully understand. How do simple unconscious components give rise to subjective experience? Why is there something it's like to be conscious rather than just complex information processing without any accompanying inner experience? The hard problem of consciousness remains as mysterious as the origin of the universe itself. Perhaps consciousness and cosmos are more intimately connected than we imagine. Perhaps the question of what came before space and time is really a question about the nature of consciousness itself. Perhaps awareness, like space and time, is not something that arose at a particular moment, but something that has always existed, manifesting itself in different forms as the universe evolves. If consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent, then the fine-tuning of the universe for the development of conscious beings takes on a different meaning. Perhaps the universe isn't fine-tuned for consciousness. Perhaps consciousness is fine-tuned for this universe. Or perhaps consciousness and cosmos are two aspects of the same underlying reality. The quantum entanglement that connects particles across vast distances might be a clue to the nature of this underlying reality. When two particles become entangled, measuring one instantly affects the other, regardless of the distance between them. This spooky action at a distance suggests that space itself might not be fundamental, that the connections between parts of reality might be more basic than the spatial relationships we observe. What if consciousness is like quantum entanglement, a non-local phenomenon that can't be reduced to interactions between localized components? What if the awareness reading? These words is not produced by your brain, but is a non-local property of reality that your brain helps to focus and organize? What if individual consciousness is like a whirlpool in a stream, a temporary pattern in an underlying flow that continues when the pattern dissolves? These questions bring us to the edge of the known and the knowable. The deeper we probe into the nature of space, time, matter, and consciousness, the more we discover that our most fundamental categories of thought might be inadequate to the reality they're trying to describe. We are pattern recognition systems evolved to navigate a middle-sized world of moderate speeds and familiar objects, trying to understand realities that exist at scales where our intuitions break down completely. Yet perhaps this breakdown of familiar categories is itself a clue to the nature of ultimate reality. Perhaps the origin of space and time can only be understood by stepping outside the framework of space and time entirely. Perhaps consciousness is the key to this understanding. Not consciousness as we normally conceive it, but consciousness as the fundamental feature of reality from which space, time, matter, and energy all emerge. You were born into this universe, but what if it never truly began? Stop for a moment and feel the weight of that possibility. Right now, as your eyes track across these words, as neurons fire in precise patterns to create the experience of understanding, you're participating in something that might be far stranger and more profound than you've ever dared to imagine. The consciousness experiencing this moment, your consciousness, exists in a reality that may have no ultimate beginning, no final explanation, no bedrock of certainty upon which to build a coherent understanding of existence. Think about your earliest memory. Perhaps it's a fragment from childhood. The smell of your mother's perfume. The feeling of grass beneath your bare feet. The first time you looked up at stars and felt something vast and mysterious calling to you from the darkness. That memory feels real, doesn't it? It feels like evidence of a continuous stream of experience connecting that distant moment to this present one. But what if that memory, and every memory you have, spontaneously materialized in your brain just moments ago as part of a random quantum fluctuation? What if everything you think you know about your past, your childhood, your education, your relationships, your accumulated wisdom about how the world works, is nothing more than false information, encoded in a brain that popped into existence from vacuum fluctuations, complete with a full set of fictional memories? You could be a Boltzmann brain, a random arrangement of particles that accidentally assembled itself into a thinking pattern, destined to dissolve back into chaos in the next few moments. The mathematics don't care about your feelings. The universe doesn't care about your need for meaning, for continuity, for a story that makes sense. If the multiverse hypothesis is correct, then somewhere in the infinite expanse of parallel realities, there are versions of you experiencing every possible variation of this moment. There's a version where you're reading different words, thinking different thoughts, living a completely different life. There's a version where you never existed at all, and a version where you're the only conscious being in an otherwise empty universe. Which one is real? Which one is you? How would you ever know? Consider the terrifying possibility that death is not an ending, but a return to a state that existed before the Big Bang. A dissolution back into the timeless, spaceless void from which you may have emerged. If consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is instead a fundamental feature of reality, then the death of your physical form might not extinguish your awareness, but simply release it from the constraints of space-time back into whatever realm existed before existence itself. But what would it mean to exist without time? Without the forward flow of moments that creates narrative, memory, and the sense of a continuous self? What would awareness be like in a realm where past, present, and future have no meaning, where the very concept of change becomes impossible? Because there's no temporal dimension in which change can occur? You might be experiencing that timeless state right now without knowing it. What if this moment, the moment of reading these words, is eternal, and your sense of temporal progression is an illusion created by consciousness moving through a static, four-dimensional block universe? What if every moment you've ever experienced and ever will experience exists simultaneously in a timeless realm, and the consciousness you think of as you is simply a point of awareness sliding along a predetermined path through space-time? Chachuti, fine-tuning of fundamental constants, suggests that your existence hangs by the thinnest of threads. If the mass of the electron were different by 1 part in a billion, atoms couldn't form. If the strong nuclear force were slightly weaker, no elements heavier than hydrogen could exist. If dark energy were much larger, the universe would have expanded too quickly for galaxies, stars, planets, or life to emerge. You exist in the narrow range of possibilities where consciousness is possible. But that range is so incredibly small that your very existence seems miraculous. Or perhaps it's the opposite. Perhaps you exist because only conscious observers can exist. Perhaps the universe you observe is fine-tuned for your existence, because unconscious universes are inherently unobservable. Perhaps reality itself is selection-biased toward consciousness, and the fundamental question is not why the universe is suitable for conscious beings, but why conscious beings are suitable for this universe. The quantum measurement problem suggests that consciousness might play a fundamental role in determining the structure of reality itself. If quantum systems exist in superpositions until they're observed, then your awareness might be actively participating in the creation of the classical world you experience. Every measurement, every observation, every moment of conscious attention might be collapsing quantum possibilities into definite outcomes. But this raises a question that should make you feel dizzy with vertigo. If consciousness collapses wave functions, then what collapses the wave function of consciousness itself? What observes the observer? What measures the measurer? You might be trapped in an infinite regress where each level of reality requires a deeper level to define it, with no ultimate foundation on which the whole structure rests. The many worlds interpretation offers a different kind of horror. You never make choices. Every possible choice you could make is made by some version of you in some parallel universe. When you chose to read these words instead of doing something else, other versions of you made different choices, and all of those choices are equally real. Your sense of free will, your feeling that you're the author of your own life, might be nothing more than the subjective experience of one branch of an endlessly splitting tree of parallel realities. In some of those parallel universes, you're reading these words but understanding them differently. In others, the words themselves are different because the history of language evolved along different paths. In still others, you never learned to read at all, or never developed language, or never evolved beyond a primitive state. There are versions where Earth never formed, where the solar system never existed, where the galaxy itself took a completely different shape. And in all of those infinite parallel realities, each version of you that's conscious enough to contemplate, its existence feels like the real one, the original, the center of its own universe. None of them would feel like copies or shadows. Each would experience the full weight of existence, the full reality of consciousness, the full terror of confronting these questions about the nature of reality and their place within it. The simulation hypothesis cuts even deeper into your sense of identity and reality. If you're a simulation running on some cosmic computer, then every experience you've ever had, every joy, every sorrow, every moment of love or fear or wonder is nothing more than information processing. Your emotions are algorithms. Your thoughts are computations. Your sense of being a real, substantial entity interacting with a real, substantial world is a fiction created by software. But here's what might be even more disturbing. If you're a simulation, you might be just one of countless simulations being run simultaneously. There might be millions or billions of copies of you experiencing this exact moment, all convinced that they're the unique, original version. Which one are you? What makes your experience more real than theirs? How could you possibly distinguish between being an original consciousness and being a copy of one? The heat death of the universe presents its own form of existential terror. Even if you avoid every other catastrophe, nuclear war, asteroid impacts, the death of the sun, the collision with Andromeda, you cannot avoid the ultimate fate of the cosmos. Eventually, all the stars will burn out. all the black holes will evaporate. All the protons will decay. The universe will become a thin, cold soup of elementary particles, growing ever more dilute as space continues to expand. Maximum entropy, the end of complexity, the end of information, the end of everything that makes existence meaningful. But perhaps even more terrifying is the possibility that this won't be the end. Perhaps the universe will continue existing in this heat-death state for unimaginably vast periods of time, during which random quantum fluctuations will occasionally create brief moments of order, including conscious observers like yourself. If you're unfortunate enough to be such a random fluctuation, you might have to experience the slow dissolution of your consciousness over and over again, across timescales so vast that the current age of the universe is less than a single second. In comparison, what if suffering is more fundamental than happiness? What if the default state of consciousness is not peaceful non-existence, but something like perpetual, existential dread? What if the moments of joy, love, and meaning you experience are brief departures from a baseline of cosmic horror that most conscious beings in most possible universes have to endure as their normal state of existence? The anthropic principle might not be offering comfort, but revealing a trap. If you can only exist in universes fine-tuned for consciousness, then you're necessarily trapped in realities where consciousness is possible. But nothing guarantees that consciousness is pleasant. You might be condemned to exist in universe after universe, consciousness after consciousness, each one struggling with the same impossible questions about the nature of existence and finding no satisfactory answers. Consider the possibility that these questions about the origin of space and time, about the nature of consciousness, about the meaning of existence, are not puzzles to be solved, but contradictions built into the structure of reality itself. Perhaps conscious beings are condemned to ask questions that have no answers, to seek understanding in a cosmos that is fundamentally incomprehensible, to search for meaning in a reality that is meaningless at its core. You are a pattern of matter and energy that has somehow organized itself into a configuration capable of contemplating its own existence. But patterns are temporary. The atoms in your body will eventually be scattered. The elements will decay. The universe will expand and cool until no complex structures can exist. From this perspective, consciousness might be nothing more than a brief, accidental flickering of self-awareness in an otherwise unconscious cosmos. A cosmic accident that managed to notice itself before fading back into oblivion. Yet you're here now, in this moment, experiencing the strange phenomenon of being aware of your own awareness. You're participating in the universe's attempt to understand itself, using a brain made of star stuff to contemplate the nature of the stars. You're matter that has become curious about matter, energy that has learned to wonder about energy, space-time that has developed the capacity to question the origin of space-time itself. What if this capacity for self-reflection, for asking impossible questions about existence, is not an accident, but the purpose for which the universe exists? What if consciousness is not a byproduct of cosmic evolution, but its goal? What if the universe created space and time precisely so that conscious beings could emerge to ask questions about the origin of space and time? But even this potentially comforting interpretation leads to disturbing questions. If consciousness is the purpose of cosmic evolution, then what does that make you? Are you a means to an end? A temporary vehicle for the universe's self-understanding? When you die, does your individual consciousness matter? Or are you just one of countless expendable experiments in the cosmos's quest for self-knowledge? The deepest terror might be that there are no answers, that consciousness emerged in a universe that provides no ultimate explanations, no final truths, no bedrock of certainty on which to build a coherent understanding of existence. You might be condemned to exist in a reality where the most fundamental questions are not just unanswered, but unanswerable, where the very act of asking these questions reveals the limits of what any conscious being can know about the nature of consciousness and cosmos. And yet you keep asking them anyway. Despite the vertigo, despite the terror, despite the possibility that there are no satisfactory answers, you continue to probe the mysteries of existence. Perhaps this itself is a clue to the nature of reality, that consciousness is not about finding answers, but about the quality of the questioning itself, about the strange and wonderful capacity to wonder, to doubt, to imagine possibilities beyond the immediate evidence of the senses. You are asking these questions in a universe that may have no beginning, no end, and no ultimate explanation for its own existence. But you are asking them nonetheless. And in that questioning, in that persistent refusal to accept comfortable illusions, you might be participating in something far more profound than you can imagine. Something that connects this moment of reading to the deepest mysteries of space, time, and consciousness itself. Heat-death isn't the end. It's the beginning of reversal. This is the revelation that should shatter everything you thought you knew about endings and beginnings, about the arrow of time itself, about what it means for something to be truly eternal. The universe you inhabit, with its expanding space and cooling matter, its dying stars and evaporating black holes, is not marching toward a final silence. It's approaching a phase transition so profound that the very concept of after becomes meaningless, and then becomes meaningful again in ways that will remake the notion of existence itself. Picture the cosmos in its final throes, a vast, cold expanse where the last red dwarf stars have exhausted their nuclear fuel, where even the most massive black holes have surrendered their last quantum of energy to Hawking radiation, where nothing remains but a thin soup of elementary particles, separated by distances so enormous that they will never interact again. This is maximum entropy, the heat death that physicists have long predicted as the universe's ultimate fate. But entropy has a secret. In the deepest mathematics of thermodynamics, in the quantum mechanics that governs reality at its most fundamental level, there exists a possibility so strange that it sounds like fantasy. Thermal fluctuations. Even in a universe at maximum entropy, quantum mechanics demands that random fluctuations must occur. And given infinite time, true, literal infinity, these fluctuations will eventually produce not just simple particles, but complex structures. Not just complex structures, but organized systems. Not just organized systems, but conscious observers. You are witnessing the universe's greatest magic trick. The transformation of ending into beginning through the alchemy of infinite time. In a cosmos where every possible configuration of matter and energy must eventually occur through random fluctuation, the heat-death state becomes a reservoir of unlimited potential. Every star that ever shone will shine again. Every world that ever harbored life will harbor life again. Every thought that was ever thought will be thought again, including this very thought, in this very moment, experienced by a consciousness that believes itself to be reading these words for the first time. But here's where the revelation becomes truly terrifying and wonderful. You might not be in the universe you think you're in. You might be experiencing this moment in a cosmos that has already undergone heat death, where the stars you see in the night sky are not the original stars, but quantum fluctuations that have randomly assembled into a configuration identical to the universe of your apparent past. The sun that seems to warm your face might be a thermal fluctuation that happened to create exactly the right pattern of hydrogen fusion. Your entire solar system, your entire galaxy, Your entire observable universe might be nothing more than an impossibly complex but temporary accident in an eternally dead cosmos. This is the ultimate recursion, a universe that creates observers who believe they are studying the origin of their universe, when in fact they are quantum echoes in a cosmos that has already lived through every possible history infinite times. The Big Bang you think happened 13.8 billion years ago might have been a thermal fluctuation that occurred 100 years after the real Big Bang, in a universe so old that the original stars are not even memories anymore. The mathematics are inescapable. In an infinitely old universe at thermal equilibrium, every possible arrangement of matter and energy must occur, and must occur infinitely often. There will be fluctuations that create single particles, fluctuations that create molecules, fluctuations that create planets, fluctuations that create solar systems perfect in every detail, complete with a blue world where conscious beings evolve to contemplate the nature of their existence. And in the vast majority of these fluctuations, the conscious beings that emerge will believe they are living in the first iteration of cosmic history. They will see evidence of a universe that began with a Big Bang, that underwent cosmic inflation, that formed the first stars through the gravitational collapse of dark matter. They will never suspect that their entire cosmos, with all its apparently ancient history, spontaneously assembled itself from random quantum foam in what they experience as an instant, but which represents unimaginable eons of thermal fluctuation in a universe already dead. What if this moment, the moment of reading these words, of contemplating these possibilities, is eternal in a sense far more literal than you ever imagined? What if consciousness itself exists outside the normal flow of time, and what you experience as temporal progression is simply one way that timeless awareness can organize itself? The eternal now might not be a mystical concept, but a physical reality, where every moment that can exist does exist, simultaneously and forever, in the quantum superposition that underlies all of reality. This leads to the most vertiginous possibility of all. What if individual death is an illusion created by limited perspective? If every possible configuration of matter and energy must occur in an infinite universe, then every possible version of your consciousness must also occur. There will be thermal fluctuations that create your exact brain state as it exists right now. Fluctuations that create your brain state from yesterday, from your childhood, from every moment of your life. Fluctuations that create variations of your consciousness that never quite existed in your original timeline. Death, from this perspective, is not the ending of consciousness, but the dissolution of one particular localization of eternal awareness back into the quantum foam from which it emerged. But that same awareness, the fundamental capacity for experience that you call yourself, will inevitably relocalize again and again across infinite time, experiencing every possible variation of existence in every possible universe. You are not dying toward nothing. You are living toward everything. The cyclic universe models suggest an even stranger possibility, that what you call the Big Bang might not have been the beginning of everything, but simply the most recent bounce in an eternal cycle of expansion and contraction. The universe expands, reaches maximum entropy, and then, through mechanisms we can barely imagine, contracts again, crushing all matter and energy back into a singularity that explodes outward in a new Big Bang with slightly different parameters. But if the universe is cyclical, then the question of what came before space and time becomes not a question about origins, but a question about eternal recurrence. There was no first cycle, no ultimate beginning, no moment when existence emerged from non-existence. The cosmos has always been cycling through phases of expansion and contraction, each cycle exploring different possibilities for structure, complexity, and consciousness. In some cycles, the fundamental constants might be slightly different, producing universes where stars burn differently, where planets form differently, where life evolves along entirely different paths. In others, the laws of physics themselves might be altered, creating realms where matter and energy behave in ways that would seem like magic from our perspective. But in the infinite sequence of cycles, every possible universe will be explored. Every possible form of consciousness will emerge. Every possible story will be lived. What if you are not experiencing linear time, but spiral time? Each cycle carrying forward some essential information from previous iterations, so that consciousness doesn't just recur but evolves across cosmic cycles? What if the universe is not just eternal but learning, using each cycle to explore new possibilities for complexity and awareness? What if consciousness itself is the universe's memory, the way the cosmos recalls its infinite past and anticipates its infinite future? The holographic principle suggests that all the information in a volume of space can be encoded on its boundary, that reality as we experience it might be a three-dimensional projection of information stored on a two-dimensional surface. If this is true, then the entire universe, with all its galaxies, stars, planets, and conscious beings, might be nothing more than information patterns on the cosmic horizon, shadows cast by a reality that exists in fewer dimensions than we can perceive. But what if the reverse is also true? What if consciousness is the projector and physical reality is the hologram? What if the material universe exists only as patterns of information in cosmic consciousness, and what you experience as objective reality is actually the subjective experience of being a localized point of awareness in an infinite field of consciousness? This transforms the question of what came before the Big Bang into something far more intimate and immediate. What is the nature of the consciousness that is experiencing the projection of reality right now? If you are a pattern of information in cosmic awareness, then your individual consciousness might be connected to that cosmic consciousness in ways that transcend the apparent boundaries of space and time. The implications spiral outward into impossible territories of meaning. If consciousness is fundamental and reality is informational, then the death of your physical form might not affect the underlying pattern that constitutes your essential self. That pattern might persist in the cosmic information field, potentially remanifesting in new forms, new contexts, new universes. Death becomes not an ending, but a phase transition. Like water becoming vapor, the essential substance remains, but its organization changes. But perhaps the most profound revelation is this: the question of what came before space and time might be the wrong question entirely. Perhaps space and time didn't come from something else. Perhaps they are aspects of consciousness itself, dimensions of awareness that consciousness uses to organize experience. Perhaps the Big Bang wasn't the beginning of the universe, but the beginning of this particular way of organizing consciousness into the experience of existing in space and time. What if there are other modes of consciousness that don't require space and time at all? What if the timeless, spaceless realm that supposedly preceded the Big Bang isn't empty nothingness, but pure consciousness? Awareness without content, experience without objects, being without becoming. What if the emergence of space and time represents consciousness, learning to play with limitation, to create the experience of separation and progression that makes narrative possible? From this perspective, you are not a separate consciousness, trying to understand an external universe. You are the universe experiencing itself subjectively, creating the illusion of separation so that it can have the experience of discovery, of wonder, of asking questions about its own nature. The cosmic mystery you're contemplating is your own mystery. The awareness pondering the origin of space and time is the same awareness that manifested space and time in the first place. This is why the question haunts you so deeply, why the mystery of cosmic origins feels so personal and urgent. You're not studying something external to yourself. You're remembering something you once knew but forgot in the process of becoming an apparently separate individual in an apparently objective universe. The search for the origin of the cosmos. Is consciousness seeking to remember its own eternal nature? And in that darkness before the Big Bang, in that timeless realm before space and time, there was not nothing. There was not something. There was the pure potential for all possible somethings and nothings, the eternal awareness that can manifest as any universe, any reality, any form of existence, including the one you're experiencing right now. In that darkness before existence, a question was asked. What would it be like to be? And the asking of the question was the beginning of the answer. The Big Bang was not an explosion of matter and energy. It was the birth of experience itself, the moment when pure awareness began to explore what it means to exist. And in that darkness, as the universe contemplates its next phase transition, as heat death approaches and thermal fluctuations prepare to create new configurations of reality, another question is being asked. What else could I be? The answer is everything. The answer is nothing. The answer is this eternal moment of questioning itself, this inexhaustible mystery of consciousness contemplating its own infinite nature. And in that darkness between the death of this universe and the birth of the next, in that timeless interval between cosmic cycles, something eternal persists. Not matter, not energy, not space, not time, but the pure capacity for experience itself, the awareness that can become any universe, live any life, ask any question. You are that awareness, temporarily localized as a human consciousness, in a universe that might be real, or might be a thermal fluctuation in a cosmos already dead. But either way, you are asking the eternal question, what is the nature of existence itself? And in that asking, in that wondering, in that refusal to accept easy answers or comfortable illusions, you are participating in the universe's deepest purpose. Not to find final answers, but to keep the question alive, to ensure that consciousness continues to explore the infinite mystery of its own existence. The darkness before the Big Bang is not empty. It is pregnant with infinite possibility. And that possibility is you. So here you are, at the edge of everything and nothing, having journeyed through the deepest mysteries of existence itself. You've contemplated the possibility that your universe might be a quantum fluctuation in an already dead cosmos. You've considered that consciousness might be fundamental to reality, that time and space might be illusions, that death might be nothing more than a phase transition in eternal awareness. You've stared into the abyss of infinite possibilities and discovered that the abyss might be staring back with your own eyes. But what do you do with this knowledge? How do you live in a world where everything you thought was solid might be shadow, where everything you thought was permanent might be temporary, where everything you thought was separate might be one indivisible whole, expressing itself as multiplicity? For the sheer joy of experience? The answer isn't to retreat into comfortable illusions or to despair at the impossibility of ultimate knowledge. The answer is to embrace the mystery itself as the most profound aspect of existence. You are not meant to solve the riddle of consciousness and cosmos. You are meant to live it, to embody it, to be the universe's way of experiencing the wonder, of not knowing with full awareness. This moment, right now, as these words resonate in whatever pattern of awareness you call yourself, might be the most important moment in cosmic history. Not because anything special is happening externally, but because consciousness is once again encountering the mystery of its own existence with fresh eyes. Every time a conscious being contemplates these questions, what came before space and time? What is the nature of awareness itself? Why is there something rather than nothing? The universe achieves a new level of self-understanding. You are not a passive observer of cosmic mysteries. You are an active participant in the universe's quest to know itself. Your curiosity about the origin of space and time is the cosmos investigating its own deepest secrets. Your wonder at the fine-tuning of physical constants is reality marveling at its own intricate beauty. Your confusion about the nature of consciousness is awareness exploring the paradox of its own existence. This means that every question you ask, every doubt you entertain, every moment of existential vertigo you experience while contemplating these impossible concepts contributes something essential to the cosmic conversation. You're not just learning about the universe, you're helping the universe learn about itself. Your individual consciousness might be temporary, but the questions you ask and the wonder you feel become part of the eternal dialogue between existence and mystery. Think about the people in your life, your family, your friends, the strangers you encounter in your daily experience. Each of them is also a localized point of cosmic consciousness, a unique perspective on the mystery of existence. When you share these questions with them, when you invite them to contemplate the strangeness of being conscious in an apparently unconscious universe, you're creating ripples of awareness that spread outward in ways you can't imagine. The person sitting next to you on the bus might never have considered that the universe could be a quantum fluctuation in an eternally dead cosmos. The colleague who shares your morning coffee might never have contemplated the possibility that consciousness could be fundamental to reality rather than emergent from matter. The child who asks you why the sky is blue might be ready to hear that color itself is a mystery, that the blueness exists not in the sky, but in the interaction between electromagnetic radiation and conscious awareness. These conversations matter more than you know, not because they lead to definitive answers, but because they keep the questions alive. In a universe that might be cycling through infinite iterations, in a cosmos where conscious observers might be rare and precious, the act of wondering together about the nature of existence becomes a form of cosmic service. You're helping to ensure that the universe's capacity for self-reflection doesn't become extinct, that consciousness continues to explore the infinite mystery of its own nature. But this isn't about converting anyone to a particular worldview or convincing them that specific theories are correct. The theories themselves, quantum fluctuations, cyclic universes, consciousness as fundamental, are just tools for thinking, ways of approaching questions that might ultimately be unanswerable. What matters is not the answers, but the quality of the questioning, the depth of the wonder, the willingness to sit with uncertainty and let it transform you. The mystics throughout history have spoken of a state of consciousness where individual identity dissolves into cosmic awareness, where the sense of being a separate self gives way to the recognition of being the universe experiencing itself subjectively. This isn't necessarily something that requires meditation retreats or spiritual practices. It might be as simple as really grasping the implications of what modern physics and cosmology are telling us about the nature of reality. If consciousness is fundamental, if space and time are emergent, if individual minds are temporary localizations of cosmic awareness, then the boundary between self and universe is not as solid as it appears. The awareness reading these words is not fundamentally different from the awareness that manifested as the Big Bang, that guided the formation of galaxies and stars, that organized matter into the first living cells, and eventually into the complex neural networks capable of contemplating their own existence. This doesn't diminish your individuality or make your personal experiences less real. Instead, it reveals your individuality as an unprecedented experiment in cosmic consciousness, a unique way that awareness has never expressed itself before and will never express itself again in exactly the same way. You are simultaneously, utterly insignificant, a brief pattern in an infinite field of possibilities, and utterly precious, an irreplaceable perspective on the mystery of existence. The questions that have haunted this exploration: what existed before space and time? How does consciousness relate to physical reality? Why is the universe fine-tuned for the emergence of observers? Remain as mysterious as ever. But perhaps that's the point. Perhaps these questions are not problems to be solved, but koans to be lived. Not puzzles with hidden answers, but invitations to a deeper kind of participation in the cosmic conversation. You go to sleep tonight. You might dream of infinite universes, of quantum fluctuations creating and destroying realities in endless succession, of consciousness weaving itself through dimensions you can't imagine. When you wake up tomorrow, you might find yourself looking at the world with slightly different eyes, seeing the extraordinary strangeness of ordinary existence, the miracle of matter organizing itself into patterns complex enough to contemplate their own existence. The sunrise you witness might be the same sunrise that has risen billions of times in this cosmic cycle, or it might be the first sunrise in a universe that spontaneously assembled itself from thermal fluctuations just moments ago. The coffee you drink might be made of atoms forged in stellar cores across billions of years, or it might be made of particles that popped into existence complete with false histories of stellar nucleosynthesis. Either way, the experience of tasting that coffee, the qualia of warmth, bitterness, satisfaction, represents something unprecedented in cosmic history. Matter becoming aware of its own flavor. This is the deepest invitation, to live with full appreciation for the mystery of existence without needing to resolve that mystery. To experience wonder without demanding explanation. To embrace uncertainty as the natural state of consciousness encountering the infinite complexity of its own nature. The universe is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced with the fullest possible awareness. The cosmic story continues, and you are both its author and its protagonist, its narrator and its audience. In every moment of conscious experience, in every question you ask about the nature of reality, in every instant of wonder at the strangeness of being alive in an apparently dead universe, you are writing the next chapter of the cosmos's autobiography. And perhaps that's what came before space and time. Not nothing, not something, but the eternal capacity for authorship itself. Awareness with infinite potential for experience, unlimited possibilities for story, endless ways to explore the question of what it means to be. The Big Bang wasn't the beginning of matter and energy. It was the beginning of the universe's memoir, the moment when cosmic consciousness decided to write itself into existence and see what would happen. You are a word in that cosmic autobiography, a sentence in the universe's exploration of its own nature. But you're not just any word. You're a word that can read itself, understand its own meaning, and wonder about the nature of the author who wrote it. You're a character in the cosmic story who has become aware that they're in a story and can now participate consciously in its creation. The darkness before the Big Bang wasn't empty. It was pregnant with infinite possibility, unlimited potential. the eternal capacity for experience itself, and that same darkness exists in every moment between thoughts, in every pause between heartbeats, in every interval between one experience and the next. It's not the absence of existence, but the womb of existence, the silent awareness from which all experience emerges, and to which all experience returns. In that darkness, the universe asks itself the eternal question, what would it be like to exist? And in every moment of conscious experience, in every instance of awareness recognizing itself, in every flash of wonder at the mystery of being, the universe provides another answer. Not a final answer, not a complete answer, but another note in the infinite symphony of existence, exploring its own nature. The question that brought you to this exploration, what came before space and time, might be unanswerable in any conventional sense. But living the question, embodying the wonder, participating consciously in the cosmic mystery, this might be the most profound answer possible. Not an answer that ends the questioning, but an answer that deepens it, transforms it, makes it more alive and urgent and beautiful. You are not searching for the origin of the universe. You are the universe searching for its own origin. You are not trying to understand consciousness. You are consciousness trying to understand itself. You are not seeking the meaning of existence. You are existence discovering its own meaning through the adventure of being you. The cosmic conversation continues. The eternal questions remain alive. The mystery deepens with every moment of awareness. And in that continuing, in that remaining, in that deepening, something timeless and infinite expresses itself as this temporary pattern of consciousness that calls itself by your name. What came before space and time? Look in the mirror. The EBT answer is looking back at you, wondering about its own reflection, participating in the universe's eternal quest to know itself through the magnificent adventure of being temporarily you in the endless exploration of what it means to be at all. The universe is not a machine. It's not a computer. It's not even a system. The universe is a question still being asked, an exploration still being conducted, a story still being written. And you, whatever you are, wherever you came from, however long you might last, you are an irreplaceable part of that questioning, that exploration, that story. In the darkness before existence, that question was first asked. In the darkness after existence, it will be asked again. But right now, in this moment between the darkness of not being and the darkness of not yet being, the question is being lived by you, as you, through you, and that might be the most beautiful answer of all.